Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast series, Compounded Interest, where I sit down with founders, investors, and community leaders making an impact in this world. As many of you know, I am a resident of New York, a city that I have been proud to call home for the last 2.5 years. But this time hasn't been devoid of challenges for the city, which faces new struggles every single day, but too often chooses to solve these issues by defaulting to the same system that got it into the mess in the first place. But that is where Whitney Tilson comes in. Whitney is running to be the next mayor of New York City and is the only person in the race with a background in business and who has not spent his life as a career politician. I first became aware of Whitney after I saw a video of Professor Scott Galloway endorsing him and his mayoral run. Shortly after that, Bill Ackman and many other Wall Street leaders have pledged their support to Tilson. For some background on Whitney, he is currently the editor of Stansberry Research, which provides in-depth investment research and analysis to over 100,000 paid subscribers. Prior to Stansberry for nearly 2 decades, Whitney founded and ran the hedge fund Case Capital Management, which managed assets of over $200 million. A value investor himself, Tilson has co-authored several books on the topic and was even a contributor to the famous Poor Charlie's Almanac, the definitive book on Berkshire Hathaway's Vice Chairman Charlie Munger's life. The son of 2 educators in the Peace Corps, Whitney spent much of his childhood in Tanzania and Nicaragua before attending Harvard for college. And it was actually at Harvard where Whitney first met Bill Ackman, a relationship that has now spanned decades. After his undergraduate degree, Whitney was among the first people to join Wendy Kopp to launch Teach for America. He then spent 2 years as an associate at the Boston Consulting Group before matriculating to Harvard Business School, where he later graduated as a Baker Scholar and spent 5 years working with famous HBS professor Michael Porter studying inner-city economics. A strong supporter of inner-city educational reform, Whitney has served on the board of KIPP Academy Charter School in the Bronx for over 2 decades. He is also on the board of the Pershing Square Foundation, a member of Manhattan's Young Presidents Organization, and so much more. Today, I was given the opportunity to sit down and interview Whitney Tilson on his campaign to be the next mayor of New York City. While Whitney and I may not see eye to eye on all issues and solutions, it is clear that Whitney Tilson is a man who loves the city and is committed to being the change candidate that our great city so desperately needs. In today's conversation, I sit down and talk to Whitney about his choice to run for mayor, his professional journey leading up to this moment, the lessons from Buffett and Munger that he would like to implement into his term, and so much more. Whether you are a resident of New York City or not, I trust this conversation will leave you better educated and inspired for what is yet to come. I do hope you enjoy my chat with Whitney, and as always, I would love to hear your feedback down in the comment section. Also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an upload. And with all of that said, here is my conversation with NYC mayoral candidate, Whitney Tilson. All right, Whitney Tilson, thank you for sitting down with us. Before jumping into the rest of the questions, who is Whitney Tilson?
Well, I'm a proud husband and father, a New Yorker now. Wasn't lucky enough to be born here, but married a New Yorker, and we moved down here 30 plus years ago. So it's sort of funny. I spent the first half of my life everywhere. My parents met married in the Peace Corps. They were teachers. Grew up in Tanzania and Nicaragua. Lived in California twice, Western Massachusetts, Boston, and married a New Yorker. And so for the second half of my life, I'm 58, so for more than 30 years, been down here in New York. My wife and I raised 3 wonderful daughters who are now moved out. They're all in their 20s and are building their lives here now as well.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more kind of about how you've spent those 30 years here in New York. I understand you come from a bit more of an investment background, so we'd love to just hear a little bit about that. And then kind of as a follow-up to that is, after all that time, why now have you decided to kind of get into the race?
Right. Actually, it dates back to 35 years ago, right when I graduated from college. A mutual friend introduced me to Wendy Kopp, who was starting Teach for America. And I turned down jobs in investment banking and consulting and came down here and helped her start TFA, which is, as I'm sure you're familiar with it, has been one of the great entrepreneurial, social entrepreneurship success stories of all times. And that really got me into the world of education reform and so forth. So I went back to Boston when I finished business school, came down here, have built a career in the investment business, hedge funds, mutual funds, investment conferences, and I'm currently in the investment newsletter business. So I'm a Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger value guy. Been to the last 27 Berkshire annual meetings. But a big part of my life has been tackling big problems, fighting injustice, helping people who are hurting. Started, I get it genetically, I suppose, from my parents and my upbringing.
Yeah.
But Teach for America was the first major thing I did in that area. After business school, spent 5 years building and running something called the Initiative for Competitive Inner City with a guy named Michael Porter, famous professor at Harvard Business School, and joined the board of KIPP charter schools. So you name it. I have a lifelong pattern of running into fires. So when COVID hit, and this was the world epicenter of that pandemic, and 800 New Yorkers were dying every day, they started building a field hospital right across the street from where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
And I didn't flee the city with my family. I instead stayed, walked across the street, and ended up spending 12 hours a day for 3 months helping build and operate that field hospital, saving New Yorkers' lives. Last example I'd give is 2 odd years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. I had a couple of friends there, started raising a little bit of money, and that sort of snowballed into 4 trips there. Spent well over a month there total in the past 2 years. Raised more than $18 million and specialized now. It started with humanitarian stuff, tourniquets, ambulances, 27 ambulances and all. But the Ukrainians eventually said, there are lots of people and organizations doing humanitarian stuff. If you can help us win the war, provide vehicles, body armor, night vision, things like that to frontline troops. So that's what I do 100% in Ukraine.
No, super interesting. And going back to the Teach for America days, I know a lot of people have gone through that, and it's been an amazing program for them.
Yeah.
But for you, making the decision to go into Teach for America when there's another shiny object there, whether it's investment banking, consulting, why did you decide to go down that path? Was it just how you were raised, to see your parents go down something similar? But I'm sure being at Harvard, a lot of people were going for whatever paid the most, and so that's definitely a bit of a contrarian approach. So just curious, kind of what led that?
Yeah, I just stumbled into a brilliant entrepreneur who had a brilliant idea. I can't take a lot of credit for building Teach for America into what it is. Wendy Kopp, the founder, deserves that credit.
Yeah.
I do credit myself with identifying a brilliant entrepreneur who had a great idea. And so I think partly, though, the reason I was able to do so was as I came. My parents were teachers. It was something I cared about. I understood the importance of an education and a high-quality education to what I had achieved in life, and wanted feel very strongly that one of the root of so many of our social problems, of the inequalities that exist in our society, go back to a school system, in which basically the quality of public school you get in this country is a function of 2 things: the color of your skin and your zip code. And that violates everything that this country stands for. Deeply wrong, and I've been committed to fighting that and giving every kid, especially low-income minority kids who generally are getting the worst schools, but they're the ones who actually need the best schools and the best teachers to escape the poverty they were born into. And so I sort of had that general knowledge and feeling that probably most people graduating from Harvard didn't have from their life experiences. But, the first school I ever went to was in Morogoro, Tanzania, and I was the only white kid in a class of Tanzanian farmers' children. And I used to come home and would be crying because I had this horrible, ugly, straight white hair. Instead of the beautiful curly black hair all my classmates had. And my parents dressed me in these awful sneakers, and all the other kids had shiny black shoes.
Okay.
When that's your early life experience, that was sort of something within me. And also, look, my general advice to young people, early in their careers, coming out of college, deciding where to go, I always figured I could go into the business world at some point. I knew I had an interest in business. I'd run a bunch of businesses in college. There was a campus organization called Harvard Student Agencies. I always knew I wanted to go to Harvard Business School and the case study method of learning. And I figured, I could always do the business stuff, and there was a unique opportunity that was something incredible that this woman, Wendy Kopp, was starting. So that's why I made the leap. And, big picture advice I would give to people in life is most people think of being successful in life is sort of a steady path upward. And in reality, most of the times you just feel like you're going sideways, right? But then opportunities come along to take a step function.
Yeah.
And in my life, from almost everything from, things I talked about, like getting involved in Ukraine or the field hospital in Central Park, those weren't planned, those were opportunistic. Getting into the hedge fund business, completely opportunistic. The conference business, the newsletter business, the mutual fund business. None of this was part of a grand plan. It was cranking it out every day, building relationships, building my skill set, and then opportunities came along, and I've tended to seize them.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue into probably what you're doing now. I'm sure
Right.
a year ago, 2 years ago, you definitely didn't envision being, in the running for New York City mayor. So kind of talk me through why you finally decided to take that leap at this stage. What is the true motivation behind there?
Right. This is actually the perfect and biggest example of what I was just talking about in my life, which is 3 months ago, I had, if you had asked me, Whitney, will you ever run for any public office? I would have said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, this decision is actually rooted in 20 plus years of being super active politically in the Democratic Party. It dates back to when I joined the board of KIPP charter schools, and I came to the horrifying realization that my party was trying to kill these schools, which are taking low-income, 100% low-income minority kids, a demographic of kids who have a 9% college completion rate. And any of them who go to KIPP have a 65% college completion rate. So it's not slightly different outcomes. It's exponentially better outcomes. So when I discovered that the Democratic politicians were trying to choke off our funding, cap our growth, I was horrified. As a lifelong Democrat, we're the ones who are supposed to care about giving a fair shot to low-income minority kids and disadvantaged communities and so forth. And the reason, of course, is because our schools are non-union, which would make them a threat to the teachers' union, and the teachers' union owns the Democratic Party. So I got mad about this when I discovered this 20 plus years ago, and then I decided to do something about it. A couple friends of mine and I founded something called Democrats for Education Reform, very simply to support politicians and try and take back our party from being just lockstep controlled by the teachers' union.
Yeah.
So fast forward to, that led to deep political involvement. My wife and I do it together. She does a bunch of grassroots stuff. I do more sort of fundraising and that kind of thing. But my wife and I, for example, are in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention this summer. We're hardcore Democratic Party activists for a long period of time. But I never wanted to be on the other side. I never thought about it because I always felt like politicians have to be total phonies and say things they don't believe in order to get elected, even the good ones.
Yeah.
And after the election, I got a text from one of my friends who founded Democrats for Education Reform with me, and this is 4 days after the election, and we were all in shock at what had just happened. 90% of U.S. counties had shifted toward Trump, and we had done everything in our power and I have been for 9.5 years to stop Trump and Trumpism since he came down that escalator. And we had just taken a shellacking, and it was horrifying. And my friend texted me, Whitney, you should run for mayor. And I said, I thought he was pranking his most gullible friend. And I said, and he said, no, I'm serious. Look at the field and look at what just happened. In the field, I'm running the Democratic primary, which is June 24th. All of the other people in the field are career politicians.
Yeah.
And if you look at New York City and how badly the career politicians are running this city, and you look at what New York voters have been saying, the last 3 elections in New York City, Trump has gone from 17 to 23% to 30% of the vote. And why is that happening? It's not because I think people are falling in love with Donald Trump. I don't think his wife likes him, right? It's because we Democrats are doing a lousy job running this city and this state, by the way, and we can't blame the Republicans. We're a one-party city and state, and basically we pay more and relative to what we're paying get less than any city in the world, I'd argue. So I looked at what had just happened with the voters, how badly our city is being run, and the situation in the city. We've lost 8% of our population in 5 years, 700,000 people. The 7 most violent crimes are up 52% in the last 5 years after we had become one of the safest large cities in America.
Yeah.
And I could go on. We're spending $43,000 a kid with our school system, and nearly half the kids aren't even reading at a basic level.
Right.
Down the list, the city government is either mediocre or failing, and New Yorkers know it. They're hurting, they're angry. You see it in the voting booth, and so I think they're looking for change. They don't want another career politician as mayor, because they see what the career politicians have done, particularly the last 11 years since Mike Bloomberg left office. And I said, okay, there's a lane. It's a very difficult lane to run as an outsider in the Democratic primary when the system is rigged against outsiders.
Yeah.
They schedule it. The party machine has scheduled the election in an off year.
Yeah.
The primary in the middle of the summer. It's a closed primary, so only registered Democrats can vote, which it's a deliberate attempt to suppress turnout.
Yeah.
Because the party machine doesn't want high turnout. They want just they can deliver the handful of their special interest group voters, and that they effectively elect their own mayor, who then they negotiate with. And you can imagine the absurdity of that negotiation and what we New Yorkers get as a result. So last election, the turnout was only 26%. 5% of New Yorkers, 400,000 people, elected Mayor Adams in a city of 8.8 million people. So I'd argue we don't really have much of a democracy here. So I looked at all of these factors, and by the way, the city's 8-to-1 matching program. So anyone who's a New York City resident who donates to my campaign or any of the other candidates gets an immediate 8-to-1 match. So it means I don't, I need to raise quite a bit of money to run a proper campaign in one of the world's largest cities. But the city's 8-to-1 matching program is a good government program that helps level the playing field. I know that no one's going to be able to outspend me. So all of those factors I put together and said, you know what, win or lose, if I win, I can do great things to help turn a city around that I love. And even if I don't win, I can go out and have a platform to fight the fight for issues that I believe in and help drag my party back to the center and run the city better.
Yeah. So you mentioned, of course, you are the only person in the race who is not a career politician. You spent a lot of your years working in the finance industry. What do you think is some carryover from that experience that you think would make you a strong candidate, to be a mayor?
The answer is twofold. One is just a strong business background. Have an MBA and spent 30 plus years in the business world, building 6 small businesses here in New York City. Certainly nothing the size of one of the world's largest bureaucracies, New York City.
Yeah.
But I've spent my career as a value investor. My specialty is in buying stocks that are beaten up and betting on turnarounds, generally of big broken companies that have fallen on hard times. And I would say almost every turnaround I've ever participated in that's been successful, and participated in just meaning as an investor, have been where there's a new CEO, a change agent coming in from outside who brings in a team of great people. So I know the model, and that's, of course, exactly what I intend to do. The other piece of it, though, that's very important is if I win, I will not owe anything to anyone, because my campaign is I'm running against my own party, against the machine, against the party bosses. And so so that's really important, to have a mayor who sort of doesn't need the job, who isn't a career politician, who can do politically unpopular things and who can piss off the various unions or special interest groups or whatever. Yeah. Because if I'm elected, this isn't my career. I don't aspire to higher office. I don't need to pander to the special interests for re-election or some higher office. Yeah. So it's a combination of sort of having a managerial and business background and generally, and the independence, that I think those two things are totally unique relative to the other half dozen serious contenders in the Democratic primary.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, managing and running 6 small businesses throughout your career. I think a lot of Americans forget that, what's the stat, 95% of businesses in the United States are small businesses just like that, especially here in New York. So I think, if anything, that also gives you a really good understanding of what the average person the average store owner on the corner is going through. So
the first thing I want to do as mayor, I've sort of got 5 big platforms: make the city a lot more business friendly, address affordability, especially housing, cut crime in half, end street homelessness, and fix our schools would be sort of the big things. Nothing massively unique about those things. That's what New Yorkers are saying they're concerned about and what they want. But related to business, everything else flows from having a strong, healthy economy, from prosperity, wealth, growth, and particularly more jobs and higher wages, right? Yeah. That then addresses everything else in many ways. So when I talk to business people, almost all of them, mostly small businesses that I've spoken with, say it's the worst it's ever been in their 10 or 20 plus years in the city. Costs have gone up a lot. So there are some factors where the consumer is sort of stretched, and they were able to raise prices for a while during the burst of inflation, during and right after COVID. Now they can't. Their costs are still going up. They can't raise prices. They're getting squeezed. But the horrifying stuff is the people who are running great businesses, neighborhood restaurants, and all the lifeblood of our city, the people who are building new housing. They tell me that, here's some quotes. They treat us like we're the enemy. Yeah. And it's the government, the city government, the inspectors, the developer who's trying to build housing, which we desperately need. Yeah. Hundreds of thousands of new units of housing in the next 5 or 10 years. And if you think about it, New York is the richest city in the world. Incredible population density, a 1.4% vacancy rate. This is the most attractive market in the world to be building, but they're not, because we've made it so onerous and impossible in terms of getting the permit to just, if you've got the land, you've got the financing lined up, and you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, and the city doesn't even tell you whether it's going to be 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Right. Then once you start building, you've got a construction site, you've got 24 people working, and a little piece of the fence blows down, and the inspector comes along and issues a stop work order for the entire site, rather than just saying, hey, fix this fence, I'll be back tomorrow to check on it, right? There's little stuff like that. You're running a restaurant, and the grades in the front of the restaurant. You would think the inspector from the city would come and be trying to help the restaurant, saying, hey, if you need to fix this, this, and this, so I can give you an A. Right? They're trying to work to make it safer and better and cleaner, but instead they're playing gotcha with the restaurant owners, tell me. The restaurants who operate the seating out on the sidewalks. That's always, local, the stereotype would be the old lady who has nothing better to do with her time, just raises a stink and creates headaches and doesn't represent the whole community. But you find any kind of business operating, or someone wants to build or whatever, a couple naysayers, who raise a ruckus can shut down, can make your life miserable as a business owner, can shut down approval of your housing project, which the community desperately needs more housing, right? Yeah. So it's a lot of it is just sort of a anti-business attitude that businesses are the enemy and rich people are the enemy and all. That's absolutely insane. We need to have the exact opposite. Yeah.
So we're all aware of the problems, and you've spoken about them clearly, but what is the solution? If you become mayor, how will you solve those issues? Because that's a big undertaking. So what is your plan there to kind of cut through some of that bureaucratic red tape?
Right. Well, big picture, I'm not here to tell you, I'm Superman and I'm going to come in and save the day by myself. Yeah. The most important thing I do, other than setting the broad policy agenda and a pro-business attitude, for example, is the 155 people that the mayor gets to appoint. Yeah. Appointing super competent, super honest. I mean, it just seems so ridiculous to say, oh, by the way, I can't be bribed by a first-class airline ticket, and neither can any of my people, right? I mean, the bar is so low. But that's the key. Yeah. I have never managed an organization of this size, so I'm going to need to bring in top managers, but in particular, the 37 heads of each of the major departments, the two biggest ones would be the police chief and the schools chancellor. Yeah. And I'm going to give those people 2 messages. Number 1, run your department better. Cut crime, educate kids better, fill potholes, kill rats, clean parks, you name it. Run the hospitals better, provide better mental health services to the people who need it, right? But secondly, find me the fat. Because we are the wealthiest city in the world. We have among the highest tax rates in the world. Multiply those two things together, and you have the world's largest budget by 2x. We have twice the city budget of any city in the world. And that's $115 billion. Just to put, it's sort of hard to grasp how big that number is, but it's over $14,000 per New Yorker. If we were a state, New York would be the 13th largest state. Our budget would place us as the 4th largest state. Wow. The New York City budget is the 4th largest state budget in the country. And that, of course, includes New York State, which is bigger. But every area that I look, massive amounts of money goes in the top of the funnel, and a trickle comes out the bottom in terms of, delivering for New Yorkers. And so we got to figure out where that money's going.
Yeah.
I don't know, and nobody knows how much of it is corruption versus how much of it is bad management and bizarre negotiations where there's not really a negotiation with the people the city government negotiates with. And so I don't know exactly how much fat is and where it is, but there's got to be $115 billion from everybody I've talked to. There's got to be $10 billion, if not $20 billion. And I can't raise taxes. We're already among the highest tax places, and we will drive even more people away. Yeah. And we shouldn't have to. We have such a huge city budget. But we need more money to put at least 10% more cops on the streets. One of the reasons crime is up 52% is because the number of cops in New York City right now is at a 34-year low. Of course, that's one of the reasons crime is up 52% in the last 5 years. We need more money for mental health services and beds for mentally ill people to end street homelessness. Yeah. One of my most controversial proposals is I do not believe you can end street homelessness unless you forbid it. Okay. A year and a half ago, the City Council passed a homeless Bill of Rights that I largely agree with, but I don't agree with 5 words in there: the right to sleep outside. I don't think any civilized place should allow people to be sleeping outside in public spaces, in parks or streets or subways. It's incredibly unsafe for them. It creates a tremendous sense of not feeling safe, and it is an actual safety problem as well, but it's a quality of life issue for the 8.1 million New Yorkers. And here's the thing. New York has what's called a right to shelter. There were, last night, roughly speaking, there were 137,000 people considered homeless in New York who had a roof over their head. We have an enormous shelter system and drop-in centers, et cetera. Yep. Very expensive, very poorly run, and that's got to be fixed. And then there were 4,000 people who were out on the streets. That's the street homeless population. Right. So we've solved 97% of the problem. And here's the thing: you can't solve the remaining 4% unless you forbid it, unless you reverse what the city council said, which is you have a right to sleep outside. I say no, nobody has a right to sleep in our public spaces overnight. But the key is the first thing anyone like me who says this is you get charged with criminalizing homelessness. And as part of my plan, nobody gets sent to Rikers, which is a dystopian hellhole that just makes people worse, right? For the crime, technically, it would be trespassing. Sure. But we've got to expand our shelter system, but not by 50%, by like 4% to just create enough beds. But nobody, a lot of the last 4% of people out on the streets are choosing. There is a bed for them, right? If need be. And they are saying, maybe for rational reasons, they had a bad experience in a shelter or something, or for irrational reasons. Quite a few of them suffer from severe mental illness and are not making good decisions about, staying out on a cold night when they could literally freeze to death. But they're making that choice. My view is that nobody should be allowed to make that choice in a civilized city.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And yeah, I totally align with you there, where I think as a New Yorker, I'm not even aware of just how many are housed. And of course, you only see that 4%. Right. So it's crazy to think that 96% of them you don't see.
Yeah, but keep in mind, most homeless are not street homeless, mental ill, or drug addiction. The vast majority of homeless in such a high-cost city are affordability homeless. It's generally an intact family, maybe with children, and one of the 2 people lost their job, and they couldn't make their rent, or the rent went up. Right. So what's interesting is West Virginia has a severe addiction issue, opiate addiction, and so forth. They do not have a severe homeless problem because the price of an average one-bedroom in West Virginia is, I don't know, $500, $800. In New York City, it's $4,000. In Manhattan, it's $5,000. So part of my goal to sort of break the logjam and the zoning restrictions, et cetera, and build a lot more affordable housing in this city, there will be ripple effects down the chain toward the people at the bottom of the housing market. And so we need to build a lot more affordable housing, and that will help address the big housing problem, because you can get the people off the street into a shelter, but then you got to get them eventually out of a shelter into longer term housing. So it requires a lot of work all the way up the chain of housing. Right now, in New York City, there's housing construction going on at the very high end and at the very low end, and nothing in the middle. I read somewhere that 2/3 of New Yorkers are working class, and only 3% of the construction, new housing construction, is for working class people.
Yeah, interesting. Because I was going to say, just as a voter, of course I care about the well-being of homeless, and I want the best for them, but at the end of the day, I need to focus on myself first. And so the question is, how does this helping the homeless help me?
Yes.
And so I understand the safety is a huge aspect and something that's top of mind for so many. And in a lot of your campaign, you've said you want to cut down a lot of that crime by, I think it was 50%.
Yes.
How do you plan on doing that?
Yeah. Big picture, the first thing you need to do is understand that crime isn't random. It may feel like it's random. You read the headlines and some person just standing there just pushed in front of the subway tracks, like the high-profile crimes. It feels very random. Yeah. In fact, if you look at, if you break New York City down into its 120,000 city blocks, more than half the crime occurs in just 3% of those areas. So it's very concentrated. Those areas tend to have the worst public schools, no after-school programs. NYC is doing a terrible job running the housing projects. The streets are a mess. The street lights are broken. There aren't enough mental health people to help people who are suffering from mental health issues. Yeah. So the city, I've talked about how the city is sort of broadly delivering mediocre services, broadly and totally failing in many areas. These particular communities, the failure is much higher. Right. So we need to invest in the communities that are being most poorly served and get at the long-term root causes of crime. So I'd say that first. Secondly, I talked, though, is there's an immediate issue of crime has gone up a lot, especially in these areas. Felony assaults on the subway have gone up 150% in the last 5 years, right? So that's another area, broadly speaking, where crime's gone up a lot, where you want to focus your resources. So, secondly, I talked about, you need to hire a lot more police officers. They're simply understaffed. And by the way, too many police officers are spending too much time doing paperwork that we've required. For example, anytime they make a stop of anybody, and this was meant as a good idea to reduce the stop and frisk era from a couple decades ago, which was illegal, immoral, and alienated the very communities that it was meant to serve. But when you require enormous amounts of paperwork just for a simple stop, you now just means cops are back in the station filling out paperwork instead of being out there preventing crimes and catching bad guys. Right. So that's part of it, but you simply need to hire about 10% more police officers to get back to the level we were at when crime was at close to an all-time low in New York City 5 years ago. And then lastly, when cops are doing their jobs, and I've talked to a lot of them, it is very frustrating for them and so demoralizing that they're resigning in unprecedented numbers. One of the reasons the number of cops is down to a 34-year low is because we've created a revolving door in the criminal justice system. So it's sort of tongue-in-cheek I'm saying this, but my first step toward combating crime is to make it illegal, because we've made.
You would think that's common sense.
Well, of course, isn't crime by definition illegal? But not if there are no consequences. Right. Not if a significant it's the lower level crime that you don't want to send someone who steals a bottle of shampoo at the Duane Reade to Rikers. On the other hand, the 10th or 20th time they do it, there should be some consequences. Because right now, they're just right back out. 70% of misdemeanors aren't even charged in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And even when they are charged, it's same-day release. So cops are like, well, why should we bother arresting anybody? And so now you have plexiglass to all of us.
Yeah.
You have to find somebody to unlock the case to buy our bottle of shampoo because it was just a free-for-all. Washington Square Park, the beautiful historic park, people bring their families, an open air drug market. In what universe is that acceptable? So I am in favor of not repealing, but definitely tightening up a lot of, I would say, 8 pieces of legislation that as mayor, I'm going to have to go to the state legislature for 6 of them, the city council for 2 of them, where good ideas, well-intentioned ideas to fix some of the inequities in the criminal justice system went way too far and basically decriminalized almost all crime. And not surprisingly, we've gotten a lot more of it, and New Yorkers are really angry about it and are not feeling safe, and I'm going to fix that.
So, of course, crime is a huge issue for everyone. Everyone is on edge at all times, and that shouldn't be how anybody lives. But earlier you mentioned the importance of business. New York City, when it was New Amsterdam, we were known for being the trade capital, and a lot of that, the politicians these days aren't supportive of. You've talked about it in other interviews with Amazon and how they had looked to come here and
we drove them away.
Billions of dollars of investment.
Tens of billions and tens of thousands of great jobs. And of course, Amazon wanted to be here. This is where Google and Facebook's, East Coast headquarters are.
Yeah.
Amazon wanted to be here. And it wasn't even, both the governor and the mayor were actually supportive of it, but AOC and a bunch of loudmouth lefties tied it up long enough that Jeff Bezos said, the heck with you, moved down to D.C. and did massive investment down there. New York should be the greatest city on earth for business.
Right.
It is the epicenter of the world capital markets. It's the richest city in the world. It has the most talented people in so many areas, but we can't take that for granted.
No.
Oh boy, it's a competitive market out there, and every other city is trying to build themselves up and say, hey, come here, lower crime, less taxes, fewer, lefty nitwits, criticizing you and demonizing rich people.
Yeah.
So to some extent, it's just a total attitude change that starts at the top, but will go down to all the people that I work with. And because businesses have to deal with, the real estate people in the city government, and the permitting, environmental, the health authorities, the police for sure.
Yeah.
And I think setting a tone of we want New York to be the greatest city in the world for all businesses, especially small businesses, is really important.
Yeah. So what can you do to help that? Because you mentioned even with Amazon, there was support from the mayoral office. It was AOC. That's someone who you obviously don't have control over.
Yeah.
And so to a certain extent, there's only so much that you can do. But what is that percentage that you can do, and what would that be to make sure that within your power you make New York as business friendly as possible?
Yeah. Well, look, if I can, if my people can find me enough fat in the system, there are certain punitive taxes. Like I talk to a lot of small businesses like restaurants, and they're like, if our lease is over $100,000 a year, which for any establishment in New York, of course they're paying, there's just a punitive 6% tax on that they're paying already. Very, very high lease costs or rental costs to rent their space. To operate their business, and then there's just a gratuitous 6% on top of that. Some selective tax rollbacks, but I am much more focused on taking that extra money and improving the environment of the city. And if I think businesses, if they ask, get rid of a couple little taxes here, or there will be nobody camping out on the sidewalk in front of your business. Ever. The street homeless will be ended 100%.
Yeah.
But that's going to take quite a bit more money. We're already spending $4 billion on the homelessness this year out of our $115 billion city budget. I think most businesses would say, invest the money there, help those people. But they're also sort of killing my business, both just in terms of driving customers away and quality of life, and all, but also, some of them are breaking the windows of the business and coming in stealing stuff from their store and so forth. So, and then there's a lot of it depending on the type of business. So, a lot of people are just like, look, I just want the city government to do its job, to provide safety. The streets are clean, have this new sanitation thing with bins and so forth to reduce the rodent problem, implement that effectively, run the schools better so that people want to stay in the city, and families with children, as soon as they reach school age, are leaving the city because they're not happy with the school system. I've got lots of ideas for how to improve the schools. So that's big picture, but a lot of it is just attitude from the top and all the people that I hire. It's just little stuff, like how long it takes to get a permit to start building something. That should be 2 months, not a year.
Right.
Another example, a guy told me who's been building affordable housing in the city for 50 years. One of the best operators. He's never had a problem with any of his projects being taken over by gangs or whatever. So he should have a carte blanche to develop anything. Yeah. And he told me about a new project he has, and I said, okay, it's a church gave him a building in a high density neighborhood. He's got the financing lined up, and I said, great, when do you open? He's like, we're stuck for 2 years with an environmental review. Okay. I was like, 2 years? What are you talking about? And you talk to any real estate person, of course, in a city where you might have lead or asbestos in an old building, there should be an environmental review.
Sure.
And it should take 2 months, maybe. But instead, he's sitting there for 2 years, and that just kills the project. So it's little stuff. Like I told you earlier, the site inspector comes along, and there's always some little thing, right? That, the fence is blown over, but nobody's coming across the fence, not a danger of the project. Right. And instead of just giving a little warning, hey, fix this, I'll come back tomorrow to check on it, instead shuts the entire project down. You multiply these little things, and people are just like, the heck with it, I'm not going to build in New York, because a lot of other cities will be much more cooperative and friendly. And restaurants, I can tell you, they're shutting down. Because of a lot of this little stuff. When a restaurant owner, a great operator, a classic, immigrant success story, has built 5 restaurants, says it's the worst environment it's ever been in my 13 years of operating a restaurant, these 5 restaurants now in the city. And why is that? They treat us like we're the enemy. It's direct quotes. Yeah. That's something I can fix pretty quick as mayor.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about having the right team around you. You mentioned Trump. Love him, hate him. I think there's a lot of excitement around the people he's brought on around him. And I think just as a young person, there's a lot of excitement as a young person to now be involved in government and to contribute to change. And I think that should go on both sides of the aisle. So how would you make sure that you are bringing on the most competent, the most reliable people into the 155? Because I think there's a lot of people who are eager, and maybe sometimes you have to be a little bit more selective than that. But I think there's a great opportunity there where people are viewing public service as a really great opportunity for people who've already, similar to you, accomplished a lot, and now they want to give back to the communities that allowed them to do that.
My general view is actually the current mayor, Eric Adams, I voted for him. It's ranked choice, so he was one of my 5 choices. I actually don't remember which order he was in, but I had high hopes for him. He was the sort of the centrist former police officer, going to keep the city safe, etc. And he has not only proven to be corrupt, incompetent, and ineffective himself, but even worse, he's surrounded himself. More than 26 of the top people he surrounded himself by have been investigated, under indictment, or resigned in disgrace. In the city has become less safe. The murder rate has come down. The other 6 major felonies are up an average of 25% in just the 3 years he's been in power. When the migrant crisis hit us, that was always going to be tough, but I can tell you the stories I'm hearing, what was going on inside the city government. They turned something that was going to be tough when 250,000 people with high needs immediately showed up in our city. But it was going to require a really strong leadership from the mayor's office to house these people and help them. and instead he completely botched it and turned it into a real crisis for this city.
Yeah.
You mentioned Trump. I would actually say Trump is doing the exact same thing now, in my opinion. And I've, as I mentioned earlier, I've been fighting against Trump and Trumpism for 9.5 years. But you're right there. He had an incredible opportunity, but Tulsi Gabbard and a drunkard Pete Hegseth and the people he tried to appoint Matt Gaetz, to run the DOJ. So I'm seeing him doing the same thing that Eric Adams did, which is appoint a bunch of people, cronies basically, based on loyalty or whatever. That's not what I'm going to do. It's very important to be an effective leader, I think, to not think you're the smartest guy in the room at all times. It's hard for me to think of any area, even the ones I know super, super well, where I don't think I can find somebody a lot smarter than me in that particular area.
Right.
So it's a question of competence and experience, but also in terms of the people I hire, but also my own approaching it with humility. And look, Houston has reduced homelessness by 60% in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I not only want to figure out what they did so we can take some ideas here, I want to find out the person who did it and call them up and say, hey, come, you've sort of done a great job in Houston, come do it on the biggest stage in the world here in New York. Find people like that. And here's the other thing that I would critique, this finding the fat. So I've talked about finding good, competent people who run things better.
Yeah.
The other piece of it, finding the fat. A lot of people are excited about this Doge idea, and Elon Musk is going to come in and apply shock therapy. And the problem is I think that approach of having super smart people, but who know absolutely nothing about a particular department, just parachute in. It's like the worst stereotype of McKinsey consultants, snot-nosed MBAs dropping into corporations and thinking that they can figure out where the fat is versus cutting fat, bone and muscle, right? And so I'll give you, an example of what's happening right now. My parents and my sister have spent their careers working in international aid, many USAID-funded projects. And Trump came in, and literally the USAID website, U.S. Agency for International Development, which is helping Ukraine in a big way in humanitarian ways, so separate from the military funding, addressing AIDS in Africa, places where people are starving in South Sudan, places like that. I can tell you, and my parents will tell you, my sister will tell you, there's a lot of fat and waste and foolishness in that sector, and what the proper approach would be to hire a reform-minded person, but who knows that sector and can go in and cut all the terrible programs, etc., but keep the critical ones, like supporting Ukraine when they're under attack, PEPFAR, the AIDS program that saved literally millions of lives. All these things, everything was just shut off, just went dark. And it's caused absolute chaos. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people will probably die as a result. It'll be hugely damaging to our international standing and provides a wide open lane for China in all of Africa, for example. And so that's I would give as an example of sensible reform and cost cutting versus foolishness that's going to do a lot more harm than good.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about the different initiatives, of course, homelessness, pro-business, cost of living, crime.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
Right.
But day one, if you were elected, what would your top priority be?
To appoint a great police commissioner, because the two biggest areas of spending would be $40 billion in the Department of Education out of $115 billion, and about $11 billion in the police department, to hire top people in those areas and who are going to go in and shake things up quickly.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to have, those are the things I can control, and get the police department some extra budget to hire 10% more police officers. Then I'm going to go to Albany and fight to lift the charter cap on the number of charter schools, which are public schools, and are delivering some of the best results for New York City parents, where there's this artificial cap. While I'm there, I'm also going to fight to reform, for example, the bail reform law, which took away bail, which was a good thing, but didn't allow judges to consider a defendant's dangerousness when making a pretrial release decision.
Yeah.
We are the only state to this day that does not allow judges to consider, well, what else should you consider other than whether, if you release somebody who you've just arrested, whether they're going to go back out and commit more murder and mayhem, right?
Yeah.
Those would be some of the very first things, but it would be focusing on hiring great people, because I know what my general policy agenda is.
Right.
The key is getting the people in place who can actually execute on it and deliver for New Yorkers.
All right, so Whitney, I understand you are the proud father of 3 girls. How did bringing children into this world change your worldview, and then also how does that change your vision for New York City?
When my wife and I moved down here in '94, her experience was she was born in New York City in 1967, and when she was 2 years old, her parents moved out to Westchester. No family would ever dream of raising their kids in the dangerous New York City. And when we came down in '94, so keep in mind the murder rate in New York City peaked at 2,250 murders. We're down about 400 today, even with the 30% increase in the last 5 years. That was in 1990. So we came still when it was a much more dangerous city. And when we had kids, though, the city was was really on a great trajectory. Crime was coming down. City was getting a lot cleaner. This was under initially the old Giuliani, not the current version that you all may be familiar with, but he was really quite an effective mayor. Yeah. And so having kids, it turned out we never even seriously contemplated leaving. And it's been, my family has had a very happy story of, we have been delighted with raising our kids in the city. And the city has so much richness and diversity and interest and the parks and the museums. Whenever it would rain out or something, I couldn't take the girls, out into the park. We would just hop down, and I'd take them to the Temple of Dendur at the Met. And it's amazing to have kids have that kind of exposure. And now I'm happy to say, my daughters all went away to college. 2 have come back, and the third is about to come back when she graduates. So 2 went to Minnesota, and 1 was in North Carolina, and they've all decided to come back. I think there is no better city in the world for a young person to come start building their career. Yeah. Even though it's a pretty expensive place to live and all. I mean, this is the place to build a career in so many different areas. Not just finance or business, but the arts, anything international related, the nonprofit sector, teaching. I tell any young person to get here by far, but certainly to any other major city where you can get mentorship and networking and opportunities and all. So my concern is that this happy story that my family has experienced is becoming increasingly rare, because if you just look, people are leaving the city in large numbers, and it's not billionaires leaving to Florida. Of the 707,000 people who left this city in the last almost just under 5 years, most are working class people who can't pay their rent. They don't feel safe. They're not happy with the schools. And so those are... So I want the same. I want every family to have the same experience my family has had. Where it's a healthy. This is what healthy cities look like, where the next generation stays and builds their life here and thrives, and the population is growing. It is a sign of real sickness that we're losing 2% of our population a year. And it's not just a COVID thing. Of the 70 largest cities in America, only 1 has lost more than 8% of its population in the last 5 years, and you can probably guess which it is. San Francisco has lost 10%. And no other city, New York and San Francisco are sort of alone in that hall of shame. People are voting with their feet, badly run cities. And I say to people who don't think I can win this race as mayor as an outsider, did you just see who San Francisco just elected? Right. A 47-year-old political neophyte who beat the entrenched incumbent by 13 points. So voters are hurting, angry, looking for change. And they just want the same things all of us want, and that I've had for my family, and I want to deliver for every family in New York.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, at the end of the day, like you said, you care about yourself, you care about your family, and that's a huge priority. And so people would certainly be aligned with that, as opposed to maybe the way some of the other people are running. But kind of a follow-on question there, you talked about the 8% of our population that has moved away. This is actually a question from someone in my audience. They were curious, how could you entice people to actually move back to New York City? I think it's one thing to kind of, stop the flow of people leaving, but to bring back the people who make the city so great. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think the single biggest reason people are leaving is because they can't pay their rent. Creating affordable options, more affordable housing, can draw new people coming out of college, as well as maybe some of the people who've already left. What would that look like? I've got a lot of ideas, but so there's construction and making it easier to construct so the numbers make sense, and two-year environmental stuff, but there's also a lot of existing housing stock. There are 1 million empty bedrooms in New York tonight, and there are all sorts of rules and regulations about, I'm not talking Airbnb, I'm talking about a New Yorker renting to a fellow New Yorker, just a bedroom in an apartment they may own. And right now, I think it's limited to you can only have 2 people, and there's a proposal to raise it to 4. Well, of course we should do that. We have also, our existing housing stock is deteriorating because we've taken a good idea, rent stabilization, and applied it not to protect individuals, but to apartments. So as a simple example, there's something like 40,000 apartments right now in New York City that have just been padlocked because they are uninhabitable right now. Let's just say an old lady lived there for 30 years. And it was rent stabilized, so her rent may have only increased 2% a year, and over 30 years, the market went up 4% a year. So she was paying $700 a month in a unit that would rent on the open market for $2,500 a month. But it needs to be renovated. So the old lady dies or moves away, and my view is that should revert to becoming a market rate apartment, and the owner of it needs to put $200,000 to $300,000 into just one unit to renovate it so that he can rent it again. And instead, we have rent stabilization that was good to protect the old lady, but once she's out, it should revert to somewhere up closer to market, if not to market. Because otherwise, the owner of the apartment, if you say you can only charge $700 a month, he's just going to put a padlock on it. So we could, if we fixed, that's a state law, if we fixed that and tied the rent stabilization to protect people, but not to lead to a deterioration of our housing stock, that would be a simple thing to do. One other idea I have is we have a lot of commercial real estate buildings, as you know, in many cities, where a lot of buildings have become uneconomic. So the owners of them have applied to the city to convert them to residential. The problem is the city, if you think about an office building, has a lot of inside offices, and each office doesn't have its own bathroom. So, the law currently requires that every inhabited room, even if you're just renting out a bedroom, for example, must have a window equal to 10% of the floor space. It has to have a window, an outside window, which a lot of office buildings, a lot of offices are on the inside, don't have that, and has to have its own private bathroom. This is ridiculous. Why don't we convert some of those office buildings into a teacher's village or an artist village with shared space for creativity and collaboration for people coming out of college? They did something like this in Newark. It's not a radical idea. It's just never been done here, but it would require changing the regs. And, you could only stay there, let's say, for a maximum of 5 years. At that point, people are getting married and having kids and moving out anyway. But it would help attract, talented young people who are being priced out of New York. And students coming out of a dormitory setting in college, they might take an inside room and have a shared bathroom on the hallway for the first couple years, and then the last 3 years they have a nicer outside room. But there's a shared common area with lots of lighting. You could do this right. It would attract talented young people, to attract and retain particularly teachers in our school system. And would be, create a bunch more housing that would ease up the housing crisis in the rest of the market.
All right, so we're going to do a little bit of a fast movement here through some fun questions. A lightning round. I know I've listened, I've done my research. You're a big reader. You're also a big audiobooks
Yes.
person. I can look around here and see plenty of books.
Yes.
What's the most recent book you've read? And then also, what's probably your favorite book from the last 5 years? I'm a big reader myself, so I'll be taking notes.
I'm actually pulling up my phone because I have about 6 sort of unread books on Audible right now.
Okay.
I listen to both podcasts, a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube.
Yeah.
And then books on. I haven't actually read a physical book in a number of years because I just download them on Audible.
Sure. Yeah.
And listen to them. So let me pull up. You're going to laugh. One of the recent books I was reading was about public speaking called Don't Say And you've probably noticed I've probably said more ums than I'm even conscious of.
Super impressed. Yeah, this is not, for the viewer, this is not edited. You
Yes.
tell me how many ums you've heard. Maddie, any?
Thank you. I'm working on it.
You're going through a lot of books.
I will tell you the favorite book of my past 5 years was Trevor Noah's Born a Crime.
Yeah.
Which is his first 18 years maybe growing up in pre-apartheid and then post-apartheid South Africa.
Yeah.
And it's just an incredible life story. And I suggest listening to it on Audible because he narrates it. Okay. And a lot of the story comes from he had a white father, a black mother, but right. He had, and in South Africa you have the Xhosa and the Zulu, and he grew up in so many different worlds, and he learned to speak in different ways, and it literally saved his life one time. After apartheid fell, there was tribal violence, and gangs were stopping cars, and he got stopped, and they were about to kill him.
Yeah.
It was a Zulu mob, and he started speaking Zulu to them. It's like, oh, I'm Zulu. Yeah. And they heard him speak the language perfectly, and they said, oh, you're Zulu, and they let him go. It saved his life, right?
Yeah.
So that was one of the most interesting, enjoyable...
No, it's funny you mentioned that. I've actually read that book. My stepfather, his family's from South Africa.
Yes.
And so it was a few years ago when I was in high school, we were, for whatever reason, there was a hurricane, and so we had no access to power for a few days. And so we had that book on our bookshelf, and I was like, I'll read this. And yeah, it's super enjoyable. Of course, you learn a lot, but you also get a really good, it's a great story about Trevor Noah and how he grew up. So that was funny. And then also I was listening to something I think from a few years ago that you did, but it mentioned Billion Dollar Whale. That's one of my favorite books. I always say that to people, just the way it's written. And yeah, so it seems like there was a lot of connection between some of the books that I've read and what you had mentioned. Yeah. This was a few years ago. But
I would say my books sort of fall into 3 or 4 categories. One is business books. So Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk, and I think his book on Steve Jobs are 2 of the best biographies ever written. Yeah. Elon Musk is such a fascinating character.
And still 2 years, like it came out a year ago, and there's already so much that's happened since then. But
then I read sort of self-improvement, sort of fitness, whatever, books. I've read a number of books about Ukraine the past couple years. The Showman is a biography of Zelensky that I enjoyed. So there have been a handful of books there. And then I love sort of outdoor adventure books like, the Into Thin Air, John Krakauer. I've climbed the Matterhorn, the Eiger, the nose of El Cap. The things I sort of dive into. I saw the movie Free Solo where he climbed the nose of El Cap, and I said, I want to do that, but with ropes and a guide. I didn't want to die.
Sure.
So those are, I probably read 50 books a year, and I've trained myself to listen at about 2.75x speed, so I can get through them pretty quickly when I'm out exercising and all. I do have to say, running for mayor, I haven't been reading or listening to much in the way of books. I'm barely able to work out, go down to the gym and work out half an hour every 2 or 3 days, whereas normally I used to exercise daily. But I view this as at least the
mental
primary
exercise.
is a 6 or 7 month push for the primary.
Yeah.
And we'll have to see if I win the primary, make it to the general. If I win that and become mayor for the next 4 years, I will have to adjust things because, staying healthy, which is for me a big part of just exercising regularly is something that I've given up the past couple months as I've been running for office. but I'm not willing to give it up indefinitely.
And you shouldn't.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important part of any person's life.
Yeah.
And definitely something that's come across in a lot of your interviews. But I love the 2.5 speed. I definitely trained myself. At one point, I was listening to The Snowball about Warren Buffett,
Yep.
who I'm sure you're,
Yep.
who I know you're a big fan of.
Yeah.
And that
I know the author, Alice Schroeder.
Yeah, that book was, I think it said it was going to be 37 hours
Right.
to listen to. And that was a very big undertaking. I think my max...
What speed do you listen at?
So I do a better job now, but I think at that point I was up to like 3.25.
Okay.
And so
depending on who the narrator is,
Yeah.
if they speak quite slowly and clearly, you can crank it up.
Like I said, I wasn't digesting everything, but I got the overall message. Now I try to enjoy myself a little bit more. I'm at 2.2.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's just such a great skill. And the New York Public Library, they have their Libby app that has so many resources. So I think that's just great. But yeah, tell me a little bit more kind of just about, I know you're a value investor. So of course, Warren and Charlie is a huge part of kind of your professional journey.
Sure.
But and just to wrap up, like what are some lessons probably from them that you think you could apply to running New York City?
Well, when I first discovered them, I was interested in the investing business, and I figured they were very rich and very successful, and so I started going out to the Berkshire meeting. I started reading everything Buffett, particularly he's a little more prolific writer and all, but I also discovered Charlie Munger as well, and so it was just sort of pure self-interest, trying to learn a new field from the best people in that area. What I discovered, though, as I spent more time listening to them, is that I would say over the years they've had more of an impact on me in outside of investing. And the reason I kept going back to the Berkshire annual meetings for the last 27 years wasn't because I was learning anything new on the investing front, but because their general philosophy and life lessons had such an impact on me, and in fact so much of an impact that I wrote a book here that I've giving you a copy of called The Art of Playing Defense, and it was a book I wrote to my own daughters to impart some of the life lessons I've learned, but I would say I probably quote Buffett 25 times in the book and Munger nearly as often as well.
Yeah.
So some simple things. I still remember, one of Warren Buffett's sayings is the importance of developing good habits, and he phrases it as the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken.
Yeah.
And by that he means, day in and day out, if you are a rude and nasty person to other people, if you eat a terrible diet, if you fail to exercise, if you smoke or use drugs, over the course of a day or two or a week or two, it's probably not going to derail your life.
Yeah.
But those small day-to-day habits, the way you treat your spouse, for example, in the short term may not matter. In the long term, they're the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
Is your small daily habits. So just talking about becoming a learning machine, and they are two of the smartest, richest guys in the world. Munger passed away about a year ago, but Buffett's still kicking. And their approach, where you would think they would have these massive egos and be strutting around and not listening to anybody and barking orders or whatever, they instead have a great deal of humility. And that was a huge, I graduated from Harvard, magna cum laude. I graduated top 5% of my class at Harvard Business School. Like when I was younger, I really thought I was the bomb. Like I was this, and by the time I finished Harvard Business School and all, okay, I now know everything, and let's go out and conquer the world. And listening to them, I realized, no, I didn't know anything back then, even though I thought I did. And I need to get myself on a very steep learning curve. And Buffett at age 93 today, and Munger at 99 when he passed away a year ago, were still on very steep learning curves. Yeah. And so it never stops. You can't ever get off that. And so becoming a learning machine, developing good habits, living your life with integrity, and never going close to any gray areas, and having humility you have to have a lot of confidence to be a big investor. You have to have a lot of confidence to run for office, right? But you better marry that with humility, and that's what most people are missing. The things I talked about earlier about hiring people, all of whom are smarter than me. I don't think I'm the smartest guy in every room, right? You'd be surprised how rare that is in the political world, right? Most people get elected because they have to be certain about everything. So all of those lessons apply massively to my decision to run for mayor, why I think I'm different than other candidates, and why I think I could be a successful mayor.
Well, wrapping up, Whitney, let's talk about your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want New York to remember you as? And finally, why should people choose to put their vote towards you?
Well, actually, in the book, I sort of wrote, I want to live my life in such a way that when I die, they have to hold 2 services at Central Synagogue, which my family and I have been members of for 20 plus years. And they have a big sanctuary. It holds over 1,000 people. That there are so many people whose lives I've touched who want to come to my funeral that they have to have 2 services because they're more than 1,000 people. Like, that's a pretty good mark. Buffett. This again sort of gets back to Buffett and Munger, where you don't want to be the guy who when he dies that nobody comes to your funeral, and they're like, we know a lot of people who are the 2 of them sort of chuckle, and they don't name names, but people who've made $1 billion and they're 4 times divorced, their kids hate them, and they have no friends. Right? So look, my legacy is someone who took advantage of the gifts he was given, and my parents sacrificed for me and gave me a great education. I've had such great fortune in my life, but that I took those gifts and tried to give back in every way that I could to my friends. And my loved ones for sure, but to my city, to my country, and to the world. He tried, but also succeeded. There you go. It's not good enough to try. It's to also really did make a difference in the world. And so the opportunity to become mayor of one of the world's largest cities, the world's richest cities, where 8.1 million people will be counting on me to make the city government work a lot better. Because in the wealthiest neighborhoods and all, sort of people have enough money. If the city government doesn't work very well, they're still probably going to be okay.
Right.
But for the vast majority, the 8.1 million people in New York, their quality of life, in fact, their actual life, may depend on the city government protecting them properly in terms of safety, make sure there's a housing system that they can afford to live decently in terms of housing, that their kids have a chance in life via good schools. This is, and that's not happening. So sort of my summary of my pitch is to, if you boil it down to voters, is if you love this city like I do, are worried that it's heading in the wrong direction and want new leadership. I'm the only guy who's not a career politician and has a business background in this race. And so that's, if you want that change, I think I'm the only guy who gives a credible shot at shaking things up and changing the direction of this city.
Well, Whitney Tilson, thank you for taking the time today.
My
this was
pleasure.
A great conversation.
Thank you.